What makes you happy?
Be yourself, be positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast. We need a paradigm shift if it comes to our economic and social systems. Let us drive this change together. The Just Another Mindset podcast shares inspiration and tangible techniques on how to create seismic shifts in an outdated system, collectively and for individuals alike. My name is Ismael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or theme that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life. Get encouraged by listening to successful thought leaders, inspiring individuals, and impressive changemakers. Change from within will last and create positive results for all of us. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's episode, we bring together some old friends in order to have a living room conversation. Some time ago, Becca explained the concept of such a conversation in theory, and you learned about the benefits of communicating and bridging cultures and connecting. Today, you will be able to listen to our very own conversation as we put things into practice. Becca, Stewart, Muna, Dominik, and myself discuss social identity, polarization, climate, media, and so much more. It's been definitely great fun and an experience we want to share with each and every one of you. Enjoy the show and let us know what you think of it.
Perfect. I also wanted to mention I'm feeling a little bad that I didn't get people from different countries in North America, but Stewart's mom is from Guatemala, so maybe he has a little bit of insight. She's involved in all sorts of projects all over the world too, so that we may get a little bit of that through the conversation. No pressure, Stewart, but I just felt like, oh, I just got two Americans. All right, so the next part, I'm glad you brought up what you did, Dominik, about how you're approaching this conversation, ready to be changed or ready to learn. We have a set of 6 conversation agreements that kind of draw out some of those qualities, or these are kind of the ways that we're hoping we approach the conversation. So you teed it up perfectly. I like to think about a conversation like this, where we do have sort of this scripted guide, as sort of an experiment. So I think it's an opportunity as we read these conversation agreements to think about, which one do I want to work on today? Like, which ones are really easy for me and which ones do I kind of struggle with? And then kind of just try one out. I'll also mention we all use language really differently, and especially we're having sort of this international conversation where English may not be your first language. And so being curious about how people use different terms in language as well, and taking the opportunity to say, you know, when you said that term, I'm wondering if you can just tell me, like, explain that, or this is how I understand that idea. Is that how you're trying to express it? So we really can come to this as sort of this is a chance for us to practice conversation skills that we don't get to practice, you know, on social media, or if we're just talking with friends that may be more awkward. This is a way that we can kind of get through that awkwardness and try and work on being better conversationalists or better listeners or whatever it is. So I think the easiest thing to do might be to share my screen for the conversation agreements. That way we're all looking at them at the same time. Unless, do you all have the conversation guide pulled up somewhere on your computer? If you're
I
all
actually do have it, yes, but we can also share screen, and then we just make sure that everybody has it there, and then we go through the document one after another. That also works for me. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Because it looks like everyone gave me a thumbs up that they have it. So I'd kind of rather see your faces instead of the agreements. So we'll just go through. I'll read the first one, and then we'll go Muna, Stewart, Ismael, and Dominik, and just read them out loud. And again, be thinking of which one you might want to work on today, or focus on today. Be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same.
Be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
Own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation in the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored. And I just want to spend a little bit of time with that last one. We use the term host rather than facilitator or moderator because it's literally like I'm inviting you into my living room. I want all of my guests to feel welcome. And so my role as a host is to kind of keep track of time and then to make sure that we're all sort of embodying these conversation agreements. But you're also empowered because I don't know if tension arises and you feel it and I don't, you're also like empowered to do a timeout sign. I'm just wondering, or I'm feeling like there was a little bit of tension, or I want to make sure that I'm understanding. So it's not to me to dictate and always be intervening, but just to kind of help us through the guide. Also, I will use a hand signal. We do a lot of sharing airtime. So you'll notice we go back and forth between everybody has 2 minutes to answer this question and then opening it back up and just kind of exploring what people have said. So I'll give you a wrap it up signal if you're coming up on your 2 minutes, and then you can just sort of finish your thoughts and then leave time for others. So and I time myself as well because the be purposeful and to the point is one that I sometimes struggle with. So I will, and you're also, if you want to keep a timer and double check me, you are welcome to do that. But just a gentle wrap it up sign if you need to wrap up your thoughts. So we will move right into round one. This one is kind of targeting our core values. So it just allows us, before we get into the topic, to kind of relate to each other. If you can take 1 minute to try to answer one of these 3 questions. So you should also be looking at them, but if not, I'll read them out loud. What are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and or the country? What would your best friend say about who you are? And what sense of purpose, mission, or duty guides you in your life? And I am going to invite Stewart to start us off. And we'll go Stewart, Ismael, Dominik, Muna, and then I'll go last. If you're not ready to answer, you can just pass and we'll check back in with you afterwards. But sometimes it can help us to kind of get through. And I know we want to get to that topic round and really dive into things. So I'm trying to get us through this one a little faster. And sometimes the speaking order can be helpful on that front. So again, choose one of the questions and just go for 1 minute if you can get it in there. Okay, go ahead, Stewart.
All right, I can go if you're ready. I'll answer what sense of purpose, mission / duty guides you in your life. I come from a very big family, big for any standard. I'm number 5 of 10 kids. And being part of such a big family and being in the middle of such a big family, I've always felt like a connector. I kind of bridge the gap between these 2 halves of my family. And so that's been a big drive for me in my life. It's been a big motivator in general to be a connector between different people. Becca mentioned earlier that my mom is from a different country. She speaks a different language. She has an entirely different background than me, than my dad, than any of my siblings. And I love this idea of bridging cultures, bridging different perspectives in life, bridging different genders and political stances. And so that really does drive me. It's a very powerful sense of purpose of connecting people who wouldn't automatically connect together.
Thank you very much for that, Stewart. And I will continue on that, and I will answer the questions about the hopes and the concerns. And one may call it a concern. I believe that we are at a pivotal time in history where we have so many different topics to solve, and a lot of challenges actually do need our attention. We have a lot of different systems that need help or that need brain power. We can talk about education, we can talk about like our economic systems, we can talk about the planet itself. And that draws me also to the hopes that I have. And I wholeheartedly believe that by talking, by educating, and by communicating among each other, that we can acknowledge the state at where we are, and that we can also find common ground to move forward and to actually, be commune and move together and solve those challenges.
Thanks, Isma. So I would answer the third question. What would your best friend say about who you are? And my best friend knows me for the last 5 years. And the first thing she would say is that I changed. I'm a different person than 5 years ago. And I treat this as a compliment, that I'm able to change myself. They would probably say that I can listen. I'm always there whenever she needs my attention. I can listen and give my attention, my energy. She'll say that I'm curious, asking a lot of questions, and always taking a lot of notes. I have my system for taking notes, my second brain, and they use this a lot. So that's what they say about me. She will say about me.
Okay, I'll go next then. This is kind of a couple different things, but I recently ran into someone at the airport. We used to live in North Carolina, and this woman, we'd kind of interacted a little bit, but not a lot. And I had given her an update and the work that I'm doing, and she's like, "Oh, actually, that makes a lot of sense. I can totally see you doing that." And so I think if my friends were to describe me, they'd say I'm involved in a lot of things. I like being connected to people and to issues. And then I like connecting people with each other, and I like gathering people, and I like connecting different ideas and trying to figure out ways to make things fit. I think that the way that I approach, my personal life, like my spiritual life, is how can I make room for everything? Like all these things that are truth, how can I kind of find ways to make everything fit? And so I even have a rule in my house that try to make it so everyone's right in this situation. Like there are no yes, no arguments, because like, yes, you did, no, they make me crazy. So find a way that you can both be right. And I think that's kind of encaptures a little bit how I approach life.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot what you guys shared already, which is why I needed a break and thought, which question will I answer? I'm going to go with a purpose, mission, duty, which is linked to also hopes for family, community, and country, I guess. Yeah, I believe, okay, when people ask me what I want from life, and is I want to change the world, I've been laughed at that for a long time, and I'm fine with it, but I still believe that there is capacity in making a difference and in changing it, which for me always starts with myself or the people I have a conversation with. Similarly to what Stewart said, I love meeting the other. I think there's so much potential if we see the other person as a human being and are capable of letting go of our concepts about another person, and spread kindness and really explore this human connection more than anything else, which because I believe that's the basis to have a conversation, and then from then onwards other challenges will there is a place for everything, as you were saying, Becca, so that everything can fall into place. But for me, it starts with creating a human connection first. And that's what drives me, for better or worse.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing. I love how it's like we always kind of say things that are similar, but we come from different angles to say that. So I really appreciate hearing everything that you all shared. Now we're going to dive into the topic. So we have this introductory paragraph. When I was talking to Ismael about what do we want to talk about during this conversation, we kind of had a lot of options. I think you all saw like a list of questions or something too at some point. And so this is again is an experiment in making it fit. Like how do we make this these ideas of how we view ourselves in society, and also a topic like climate, how do we make those fit into a cohesive conversation? So does someone else want to read the paragraph that's here?
I can read it if nobody wants
Thanks,
to.
Stewart. Perfect.
Let's see. Modern society presents a wide range of issues to care about and advocate for. As individuals, we are all limited in how much power or influence we have around those issues, which is further restrained when we're facing polarization. We all want to live in a healthy environment, yet most of us make compromises to enjoy the benefits of modern society. We have more control over some forms of pollution than others. We all feel the effects of polarization and the media that can escalate issues like climate and shut down the conversations we need to be having. On top of all of that, because of our different social identities, we each have to navigate different levels of influence and privilege to enable the change we want to see. This conversation is designed to explore each of those elements and come to a better understanding of our roles and how we feel called to contribute in society.
All right. So we will start with some questions on social identity. So this time around, you get 2 minutes to answer one of the questions. So you get double the time that you did before. And then after everyone has had, so we'll try and get through this without interruption and go through and everyone gets to answer. And then we'll spend like 10 minutes getting to explore what we heard from each other. So it may be helpful for you to have a piece of paper down if you hear either one of those language things that you want to revisit, or if there's an experience you've had that's really similar or very different. If there's a follow-up question you want to ask, just kind of take a note. And then after everyone's had a chance to answer the question, we can explore that. So the 2 questions that you're choosing between this time around are, what groups have you joined by choice? And to what groups are you ascribed by other people or society at large? How does this impact your self-concept? And the second option is, when have you benefited from belonging to a certain social group? When has it been a challenge for you? And so just kind of give you a little bit of silence to gather some thoughts around that before we jump in.
So if I understood it correctly, it's just one of those 2 questions.
One of those 2. Yeah. So we could be answering different questions, and that's great, because then when we get to explore what people have said, if I didn't get to answer one, I can kind of answer one just by interacting with what other people chose to share. Okay. And I can go ahead and get us started. And then we'll go me, Muna, Stewart, Ismael, and Dominik. And then again, if you're not ready, you can pass and we'll come back to you afterwards. And this will probably be our last time doing a speaking order, just to kind of get us used to each other. And then after that, we can kind of raise hands and jump in. But since we haven't had a conversation before, it can kind of help to take the pressure off. When do I raise my hand? So I am going to answer the first question. Which groups I've joined by choice, and to which groups am I ascribed by society at large? Obviously, I am white and I am a female. And so I think that increasingly as my understanding of the world, and I'm American, as like increasingly as my understanding of the world expands and deepens, I have more conflicted feelings about those three, right? I remember the first time that I traveled abroad and was like, like I had this different view of America than when I'm in the US. And so that was kind of grappling with this. I think the first time I went to Italy when I was older, we got in the car and it was all American music playing. And I was like, oh, I kind of wanted to hear Italian music. I didn't realize, or people were watching The Simpsons dubbed in Italian. And I was like, like I didn't realize how pervasive American culture was because I hadn't experienced it before. And so I felt a little bit of guilt. And I think that as I kind of dive into anti-racism work and understanding all the things that we have to deal with in the US with racism, again, like a little bit of guilt, like, oh, I can't change being white and I'm not sure how to navigate this space. And so it's been like a long journey kind of understanding, you know, again, where I have influence and where my place is and how I can make an impact on that kind of issue. I remember being in a conversation. I was doing this sort of diversity training with this education program that I was involved in, and everybody had different strips of paper. And there were things like sexual orientation, political affiliation, gender, ethnicity, race, religious affiliation, and you had to put them in order according to how you primarily viewed yourself. And as we went around the table, I noticed that the top sort of identity marker for everyone was the one that kind of pushed them to the outside, that made them different. So, and it was the same way for me. Like most of my life, I've been in the religious minority where I've lived. And so that was always how I viewed myself, because that's what makes me different. Like that's what like makes me feel like I'm unique or pushes me outside, or I have to kind of grapple with that part of my identity more. Since then I moved to different places and that's not the top one anymore. Like maybe now that I'm a lot more involved in women's issues, now it's my gender that's the top. And so I think it's interesting sometimes that our social identity can shift depending on where we are in our stage in life. And that also it's most often what makes us feel like we're on the outside. And so I just find that really fascinating, the ways that our social identity can evolve, really.
Yeah. I will answer the second question, which intersect to a certain extent, I guess, to the first, and also what you were saying, that our identities or roles which we identify with change depending on our environment to a certain extent. So, of course, from which when have you benefited from belonging to a certain social group? So I'm perceived to be German, but I was raised abroad. I was born in Brazil and I lived in Russia, in England, in Luxembourg, later in India. Then I spent a few months in the US. So I don't feel really that there is a home for me, which I don't mind, because I'm like a fish in waters. The waters are different and then you get to explore and find things out. But I find it interesting that I've made the experience that, of course, I'm perceived to be German, and I had a colleague of mine who came here, or is the daughter of Korean immigrants. So she does not look German, but she was born and raised here. So she knows a lot more about German culture, especially the ones when you're, like you were saying, listening to pop music in Italy. I have no clue about the 80s music. I know there is a big thing called the Deutsche Welle, and I've listened to 3 songs more or less, but that's the extent of it. But she's perceived to be the outsider and I'm the insider. But whereas if we were capable to look into each other's head, it would be the other way around, because there's still a lot of things which I find very strange in Germany. But I guess that counts for everywhere. Of course, the easy thing is that my name is German enough, which makes it easy for applications to that extent. At the same time, I'm part of the group of freelancers, which makes it more difficult, because Germans prefer people who are steadily employed, because that gives a vibration of security, not a sense of the vibration. Yeah, generally speaking, I think over the years, I feel very comfortable with being an outsider, because I think it gives you a certain sense of freedom. to do things as you like, and not bound by certain group rules or fixtures or something like that.
Perfect. So my turn. I think I'm gonna answer the first question. Which groups have you joined by choice and which have been given to you? It's an interesting thing here in the United States, and maybe it's across the whole world, I don't know, but it's very particularly here in the United States that race is a very important definer for who you are. But I am a biracial person. My mother is Latina and my father is Caucasian. And you'd think that would make you a person of two worlds, but actually it makes you a person of no world. That when I'm with my Latino side of the family, they're like, oh, those are our white cousins. Those are the Fletchers and we're the Lopezes. And when I'm with my, Caucasian side of the family, they're like, oh, those are our Latino cousins. They've got dark curly hair and darker skin than we do. We're all blonde and tall. And so it's interesting that you don't really get to have two worlds, you get to have neither. And it's definitely helped define my self-concept in a way where I don't have to define myself off of my race, because people don't even really know what it is most of the time. Online with a name like Stewart Fletcher, everyone's like, oh, that guy's probably a white guy. Nice and easy. And I don't speak Spanish, and so that makes it even more difficult. But it's given me the latitude to have my self-concept be built in the values and the virtues that I want to define me. That instead of just finding, the parts of my racial heritage that I want to define myself as, instead I can just be entirely myself. And it's a very freeing thing. That's something that my mom has given to us as children too, because that was a big thing in her family culturally, of like, you're not just a Guatemalan, you're not just a Latina, you are your values. And so my self-concept is all built on who I am when it comes to making hard decisions. Like where will my integrity take me? Where will my honor go? How much trust and how much trustworthiness will I project? And so that has been a very powerful way to build my self-concept, because it's kind of immovable.
And I think I will continue. Thank you very much, Stewart. And I will also answer the second question, though it, of course, also has partial answers for the first one. And I can relate a lot to what Muna said, because yes, I am born in Germany, but I moved to India when I was 3 months old, lived there for a couple of years, came back to Germany, went back to India. From there, went to the Netherlands, went to Singapore, went to the UK. Now I'm somewhere based in Spain, and I've also traveled a fair bit. And one of the first things that people tell me back whenever I encounter them is they ask me, where are you from? And I tell them I have a German passport, but I do not necessarily feel German. It might be that I do not necessarily so much believe in nationalities, because for me, different people from different parts of this world, it does not matter as much of this nationality. But I can also relate a lot that I have benefited a whole lot from being German, from being white, and from being blonde. But at the same time, it's not what I define myself to be. And for me, being German is a door opener for so many things. I am very grateful, and we could argue about the education system, and we could argue about so many things. But if you're born white in Germany, even though I'm from a rather low income family, I still have a lot of privilege. But on the other hand, by living the life that I live, that most people who are associated with those attributes would not live this free life. And when I listen to Stewart, and then when I listen to Muna, and also to you, Becca, I hear that this identity at some point, from being a burden, it became a freedom, because you can choose who you are yourself, and then you can live according to your values and live in life of integrity. And for that, for me, it was also very helpful. But sometimes I'm in between. On top of that, I'm called Ismael, which is not necessarily the most common name for a blonde boy like me. I obviously had a lot of funny jokes going on in my high school and in my prior life about that. But in the end, it didn't really matter because there was always a picture of a blonde kid. So I could always attend, I could do always something. But from a very early age, it was always somewhere in between, though I believe that especially the first years, I didn't realize, because my name is Ismael. I mean, what is Ismael associated with, right? If you think about it, once you're 6 years old, you don't think it's a weird name. And then you go to school and then people tell you, okay, maybe Ismael is not a name for a blonde kid. And then that stays with you for some time. And then after, again, a couple of years, you're like, you know what? Yeah, this is my name and this is who I am. And I don't really care if I'm German, Polish, Spanish, or American. And this is my name and this is who I can be and this is who I can shape to be.
It's my turn and I'm already fascinated with your answers. Especially that I want to answer the first question, and you described something I perceive as a global perspective, and I want to talk about the local perspective. In Poland, 95% of people are Catholics, belonging to one certain group, almost all white, very low diversity. And 10 years ago, I decided to change my life. I left the church, I divorced. And because of this, my whole family stopped talking to me. They said that I'm this black sheep, go away. We don't want to have anything in touch with you. And the group I chose by my choice was to decide by myself to not go with what was prescribed for me. And I remember the final conversation with my father, who said, who tried to understand why I stopped believing, so why I'm leaving the church. And that's how I define myself. And he said to me, Dominik, your grandfather believed in God. Your grandfather believed in God. I believe in God. Why don't you? So it was so strange conversation. And that defined me because I define myself as an outlier in this group. And from that moment in my life, I try to find myself in groups as an outlier, the one that brings different perspective, the one that talks about different stuff, the one that maybe have different ideas. So that one choice 10, 12 years ago about divorce and leaving the church shaped my self-concept as the outlier in most of the groups I join. Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. It's kind of an intimate question, like how do you see yourself in the world? And I appreciate, you know, all of the elements that you shared and your willingness to kind of be authentic in sharing. So we'll just take a couple minutes if there are follow-up questions or other things that you want to explore that you heard or it made you think of something else, then we have some time to do that. And I'll probably just like pipe in with a time check to say, do we want to take a couple more minutes or do we want to go back to some questions? So just so it doesn't alarm you and you think that if you were talking when I do a time check that I'm talking to you specifically. So.
If I may start, I mean, I have questions for all of you because I found your stories and experiences very moving to, yeah, is maybe the best word. I'll ask Ismael because I'm curious about how the others perceived it. You were saying that you don't believe in nationality. I always get the impression that it's really a German topic. We have issues as Germans with being German. So this is the whole vibe that I get. But being an international group, I was wondering if this was shared or what your perception was when Ismael shared about German nationality or nationality as such.
Yeah, I think I recently did a cross-country trip. So we drove from Utah. I'm from Maine. That's where I grew up. And so we drove like as far as you can really from where we live right now to be in Maine. And just as we were driving through and you watch all the landscapes change and you really even the feeling and the energy of a place is so different throughout. it just kind of made me appreciate how huge the United States is and how very different it is culturally and all of that. And so I think that I almost feel like you have to leave the United States to understand like how people view the United States or what it means to be American. Because otherwise it's like, oh, I'm from the Midwest or I'm from New England and this is my like my tribe and my people. And there really are parts of my personality that come from being an 8th generation Mainer, right? Like it's part of it's shaped who I am, but our landscapes are so different and the areas and regions of the US are so different that I feel like, and I don't know if it contributes to like this extreme polarization that we see, that it's hard to, we're all American, but we're all so different. And it's hard for us to see those differences if you don't travel and if you don't make those connections. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. Like, I wish it even could be like, well, we're all American and it's united. It doesn't matter what region or political party you're from, but, yeah, that was what was coming up for me talking about nationality.
I have a story about this. When I was younger, like 10, maybe 12 years old, as I told you, I almost the whole my life spent in this area. When you, Mona, and you, Ismael, were telling where you traveled, where you lived, I was, wow. I've been in many places, but never lived for more than like 2-3 months, maybe in a place. So when I was 10, 12 years, my whole world was my grandfather's, and especially my grandma, who lived in pre-war Poland and during the war. And my view on Germans, Jews, and so on were very, very directly shaped by her views, not positive views. And I even remember when I was in high school and there was discussion about some books where the Jews or Germans were characters there, I said something that was her words. Luckily, I met with people who were much more aware about the history and told me that I'm. They called me on my bullshit, and yeah, if we met like 20 years ago, I would have very different view on your nationality and where you come from than now. Since then, I worked in multinational projects, in multinational companies. I met a lot of people from different countries. And yeah, you are Muna, you are Ismael. It doesn't matter if you are German or Spanish or any other from other countries. But yes, if I stayed in my small village, in my small town, and haven't moved to Krakow and to big companies, I would have very different view on your nationality, depending on when I move, when I live, and what I do. Oh, yeah.
One of the things I always find funny about human nature in general is we are always looking for things that make us unique. Humans like always want to have these kind of unique individual things. And so it's funny that sometimes we have the tendency to look at others as simple and ourselves as complex. And like you were saying, Becca, about the United States is, the 4th largest country in the world by landmass, 3rd by population, just a massive place. But I think of myself, I'm like, oh, well, I'm this unique way, I'm this unique thing, I'm this unique thing. But America in general is just this. Or we, like, as Americans, we do the same thing to Europe, and Europe is, thousands of years older than the United States and has so many diverse cultures. But sometimes we're like, oh, well, we're like this in America, but Europe is like just this thing, just this one thing across the board. But we give ourselves as individuals the credence to be individual and unique and different. And so it's always funny to me to be like, I don't know why we do that, but it's a very common tendency. We see ourselves as complex, and oftentimes we see whole groups of people as simple.
And to continue on that thought, I really like that, Stewart, and I do agree that many of us, talking about society, need to be unique. And on the one hand, we want to be unique and live our freedom and be the individuals who we are. And on the other hand, we all, at least most of us, let's say most of us, seek for communities of like-minded individuals or of people who actually create community. So it can be in an online format like we have it right now. We see community with people who have different values or same values. It can be actual communities living with people from different backgrounds. It can be finding people. So I also find it very interesting that, yes, we do want to be unique and individualized people. I think this is also something that we have learned, especially over the past, let's say, 80 to 100 years, that we are all so individualistic. And on another level, we also, at least most of us, talking for myself, want to be part of some kind of group, some kind of society that we still interact with and share attributes with. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that to the group.
I would phrase it probably a bit differently. I'd say we want to belong. And for me, belong means that we want to be accepted for who we are, meaning that, if I may take your example, Stewart, it may be that you are the person you are. It may be also that maybe you, at points that I can see your Latino side or your Caucasian side or whatever it is, but that I see you in as a whole being, the one person that you are at that moment. And if we and give you space to be that unique self that you are. And I think this is where we hope, when we surround ourselves with similar people, that we get this, but sometimes forgetting that maybe it just, that we create a bubble which echoes just one aspect of ourselves, and to find a way to flow through these different aspects, and to let go or step out of a bubble which creates a sense of belonging, like your story a bit, Dominik, leaving the church when it's such a, well, I mean, historically speaking, or from a family narrative, it holds such a dominant place, takes quite a courage. And I think this is sort of the process of finding that we belong and that we are accepted for whom we are, maybe even by a church group if we don't believe in the religion they offer. I think that would be my take.
I think too, when we're talking about community and belonging, oh, sorry, Stewart. We had this conversation as a team, like, about community, and we used to be so geographically located, like you talking about growing up in a small town. I grew up in a small town, and it was like, I live in a place now where there are multiple elementary schools in one city. And I grew up, like, I was with the same people from age 5 to when I graduated from high school. Like, there was that group and that place. And I think now that we have the internet, like, people are creating those online communities all of the time as well. And they can get even more narrow and even more narrow and even more narrow. And we're not, like, and with COVID, I feel like this in-person community and neighborhood, where it's harder to interact. And so then you lose some of that diversity of thought and experience, and even intergenerational conversations, because you're gravitating toward the people where you feel like you belong because they're similar to you. And you have that mutual belonging. So it's an interesting addition to this idea of social identity, where I can seek out places where I absolutely 100% fit in, but I'm losing that diversity that can also be really nice.
I think that is a big part of polarization, especially here in the United States. I think people have the tendency to want to belong to something bigger. And so they're willing to sacrifice parts of who they are to identify with kind of an abstract version of what people say this group is, whether it's liberal or conservative, whether it's men or women, whatever it is. We've created so many attributes that we, like, forcibly ascribe to these groups. So people desperate to belong will sacrifice parts of them that don't fall in line with that in order to be part of something bigger, so they don't feel so isolated.
I read somewhere about research, how people are choosing where to belong. And there was this famous experiment where there was a bunch of people, and they divided those bunch of people into 2 groups, and they checked if how the cooperation will occur between people in one group or among the groups. So people knew that the groups were assigned randomly. Still, they were more willing to help people from their randomly selected group than from the other group. So even if we know that this is a randomly selected group, we are more willing to work, help those people. I was listening to what you said, Stewart, and we tend to say that we have this polarization now as a new concept. And I'm not sure if it's a new concept, to be honest. Even when I was in high school, there were guys who were in the sports team. I was the one with nerds. There were other people with other groups, dance group, and so on. So I always remember belonging to a group, and it was my group versus them. So I'm not sure if this polarization is that new idea. I think that we always wanted to be part of something.
Yeah. I actually, and then we can kind of move on, but I'm interested to see, talking about language, how you view polarization. Like, what does that mean to you? Because we have specific ways, I feel like we use it in a political context or a social context. And so just interested to know how you approach it.
You're asking any specific person or all of us?
Anyone, but if you want to start, that'd be great.
So my understanding is that division, we have to be polarized, meaning having different opinions, different points of view, belonging to different groups, and not willing to communicate, not willing to cooperate, not willing to help other groups. So that's my understanding, and that's how I use polarization.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the keywords is conflicting. So if you have polarization, then you have conflicting understandings or conflicting groups of something that are, as Dominik stated, also in my understanding, are not willing anymore, or that are not willing to find ways with the opposing party or with the opposing group or with the opposing community. And that can happen, especially in a political realm. This can happen in spiritual realms. This can happen in so many social realms and so forth.
I think in the US, we've increasingly, especially in the political realm, used the phrase toxic polarization. And I think it's kind of, so often when I think about polarization, I go directly to that level of polarization where we're just extremely dismissive of other people. We're no longer willing to humanize them or their experiences, and we start to vilify people. And I think that we see that increasingly on the political stage, where, you know, there were so many people after the 2016 election of Donald Trump who just lost relationships with family. And we're no longer willing to be in relationship because you voted for that person. That means X. Like, you are now, like, no longer am I willing to try and understand you or see you as a human. I've attributed you to something and just set you aside. And so I think just because that's so top of mind, and also in the work that we do and what we see, that I go like straight to that really alarming, like, there was actually a study where it was something like 58% of Republicans and 65% of Democrats said that we would all be better off if large groups of that other political party just died. Like, that's the level that we're talking about. And I think, you know, our next two kind of sets of questions are on media, which plays a huge role in this, like, polarization and reinforcing these really negative stereotypes of the others. And then also our ability to tackle issues like climate change, where, you know, if you belong to this political party, it means you're obviously a climate change denier, or it means you obviously are just trying to ruin the economy by investing in, like, whatever it is, you know, like shutting down coal mining and all of these people lose their jobs. Like, we simplify it. Like Stewart was mentioning, like, our side's really complex and we've been really thoughtful about it, but you have just really simplified it, and it's no longer, we can't talk anymore. So I appreciate just taking a moment to just kind of name this polarization and the different levels that it can be at, because I think it's really applicable to the next two rounds. And for sake of time, we'll read all 4 questions, so you can answer any one of the 4. And if no one chooses to talk about media, or no one answers a question from climate, then we'll just spend the rest of the time kind of talking and having a discussion. So as you pick which question, if you just kind of refer to it, sometimes what can happen, especially when we have so many questions to choose from, is that we end up reacting to what someone else said instead of answering our own question. So just kind of be mindful of that. And I'll read the last 4. And this time around, you just raise your hand when you're ready to speak. But make sure that everyone gets a chance to answer the question before we move to that back and forth. So the 4 questions are: how have you seen news media shift or change over the years? What concerns or appreciation do you have for those changes? Or how do you decide what news sources to trust? How has your trust in news sources changed? What news reporting practices or standards increase your belief that a news source is credible? Or have you made any changes to your lifestyle or energy consumption due to your views on climate change? What happened? Or planet Earth is literally our common ground. How have you seen or experienced this common ground as a unifying force, a divisive or polarizing force? So whenever someone is ready to kick it off, just a visual indicator.
I'd love to start, especially, okay, because I've seen that Ismael was. I want to answer the last question about planet Earth as a common ground. And I remember when, Muna, you were introducing yourself and you said about something about connecting people, being the one that connects people. That's so interesting for me because I have very dark views on this. I'd love someone to change my mind. I talk to many people from different parts of my neighborhood and from this city and the smaller city I come from. And very rarely I see anyone I believing in common ground, saying that what's happening here has any influence on what's happening in China, the States, Brazil, and so on and so on. So I know very few people who think about Earth as a globe that we all should take care of. Very, very few people. And of course, I would love to think like this because I have children. My sons are 15 and 18. I'd love them to be happy in a healthy environment in the future. But same time, I see so much division, thinking about my own part of the world. Even I know that my father, he thinks what's the cheapest source of heat, not what's the cleanest source of heat for him. He's not thinking about his neighbors. For sure, he's not thinking about Earth. He's not thinking even about his neighbors across the different part of the street. So I remember reading Yuval Harari book about *Sapiens*, and he claimed that the future problems had to be tackled on multinational level. So it's not only the states doing something or China doing something to protect our globe. We need to collaborate. And I work with companies. I work with companies that are growing, that are going from 25 to 50, 100 people. And I can see that even in such small groups of people, it's very hard to communicate and think about the common good. They're thinking about their team, their comfort, not the whole organization. And if I think, okay, I'm one of 8 billion people, it's even hard to imagine for me what's happening, I don't know, 100 kilometers from here, even 1,000 kilometers. I'm not thinking about this. So I'm really, really looking forward to you to change my mind about this and saying that there is hope.
I can continue if I may, even though Dominik, I'm afraid I'm not gonna change your mind on that too much. I may introduce you to people and networks who actually very much believe or acknowledge this interconnectivity of things and beings and planet Earth. So we can take that somewhere and then discuss. And I would like to answer the third question because it's a very personal one for me. I'm going to read it out, which is, have you made any changes to your lifestyle and energy consumption due to your views on climate change and what happened? And I believe that I have been brought up with a good or with an understanding of this finite planet and of this common planet. But obviously the information that has been evolved over the past 10, 20 years has also changed my view on how to live together with the Earth and on this planet and with this planet. And in fact, I eat fully plant-based. I make sure to buy as little clothing as I can, partially due to the climate change and my lifestyle, or the choices that I have done, especially over the past 2 years, where I have left my career of being a management consultant and doing something like podcast and working on other projects, has definitely reinforced my way of living. And it actually puts me into a big conflict, not only with myself at times, but also with my partner and also with friends and family. So what you were stating earlier, because I believe, and that is my belief system, if I talk to people who are from my old bubble, I just want to call it, they're investment bankers, they're management consultants, and we talk about the severity of climate change and that we all do need to take action. And it's good to be aware, and it's actually necessary to take action. Everybody does agree, but very little people actually do change. And I believe that if we all agree, but we do not take action, we will not change much. And that puts me into a very difficult position as we speak, sometimes with very close friends where I know they are very good humans. On a human level, they care for other people and they have cared for me and I care for them regardless. But as we have very conflicting, polarizing, maybe even ideas of what is the impact that each and every individual has and how much of change do we need on our lifestyle, I am also sometimes asking, okay, like if I try to make those changes, and I'm very far from living a perfect life, don't get me wrong, but if we do not all at least acknowledge it, and I think there is a level where it's acknowledgement and you decide against it, and that would be fine if you say, okay, I know that flying is worse than taking the cycle or taking the train, but I had to do it because of time constraints or whatsoever. I think it starts with this acknowledgement. And so this lifestyle change certainly is something that is an interesting factor for myself.
I would like to take this point or the points that you made, but to answer I think it was the first question, how have you seen news media shift or change over the years? What concerns or appreciation do you have for those changes? I'm not sure if I actually see any changes in the media or if my perception of the media has changed. I came across a German journalist who wrote a book back, I think in 2014, 2016, about the bot journalists. He was referring mainly to Germany, but how relations are so close between government and media outlets that a lot of journalists aren't even aware that they're actually sort of not writing freely anymore, having a free perspective on what they observe, but it's all interlinked. Then you get invited. He was saying that even when he started out, he got invited to Dubai, I think, and then they asked him what he would like to do while he was here, and he said, "Oh, I'd like to take diving lessons." And all of a sudden, he got a complete diving set and was thrown in. Given the opportunity to take a diving class. He was made, I think, an honorable citizen of Colombo or somewhere in the US, and he was really confused because he's never been there. And afterwards, because he was a journalist operating mainly or working from the Middle East, then all of a sudden Americans, in this case, I think it counts for any nationality, so don't get me wrong, but he was then asked if he could, if he wouldn't mind giving a helping hand there or report something on that, and he wasn't even aware that that it's not a free journalism anymore. And in the past 3 years, I've come across a lot of conflicting reporting, and then it's the question if it's alternative media or the usual channels or whatever we want to call it. And I've just, for myself, and that counts for climate change as well, which makes me a bit uncomfortable because I usually don't speak about it, is I read conflicting news and I don't know what to believe anymore. I read studies of people saying, yes, we've had a correlation between CO2 levels and the ozone layer for 20 years, but that the data is much too short to actually take actions or to make any suggestions about the future. Is this really a correlation, or do they go into different directions? And I don't have the information. And I think this is what has impacted me when I look to the media, that at certain points I feel like, oh gosh, I have to study everything now to formulate my own opinion. And that I've become very, I'll use the word distrustful when it comes to dominant narratives, because I always believe if there's just one way of looking at things, then it cannot be right. Because like Becca, you were saying in the beginning, everything has a place, and I believe in these puzzles myself. It's just a measure of placing it together. And with climate change conversations, when people come to me, it's like, oh, you don't need to do this, or you should be doing that. And I'm wondering why the conversation is so steered to local people, where in my environment, at least, big companies or let's call them Hollywood actors all make big statements to the UN what we should change about the climate, but they all own their private jets. They all use their big, and that's what I find very conflicting. And I'm thinking, for me, there's something wrong. I don't know what the right thing is. So I don't know what the path is. If any of you do know, please let me know.
I can go next. I wish I knew what the path was. I wish I could tell you. I wish I just had it ready, like a book that I could just hand you. But I feel the very same way that you do, Muna, that there is so much science that is so far above my pay grade to understand. And so when it comes to that last question, do I think like the planet Earth is our common ground? Is it more divisive or is it a uniting force? Everybody I've ever met so far believes they should take care of the Earth. I've never met someone who's like, nah, I don't care about the Earth. But like Dominik was saying, it depends on the priority you give it, though, because most people think I should take care of my family and my finances before the Earth. And it's hard to argue, especially if you're a poor person or you're struggling, or you can't afford to compost all of your plastics and things. It's like, yeah, well, it's hard to try to force this thing that seems out of our understanding to make it a bigger priority than paying rent that month. And so I can understand that. When it comes to the idea of like global warming, climate change, these things that I don't really understand, I can be passionate about it, but I don't always know the next move. But there are things in terms of conservation, preservation, that affect us every day, especially here in Utah, that you can't understand. For those of you who don't know much about Utah, Utah is a desert, and we are always in a drought. Every single year, we're in a drought. Our main source of water is snowfall, and if we don't have snowfall for 9 months out of the year, we will always be in a deficit of water. And that never happens. We never get that much snowfall, at least not in the last like 20 years. And it's funny that we talk about climate change and this and that, and people are always like, okay, well, we need to talk about private jets and corporations and pollution. But here in Utah, we could just talk about not watering our lawns and not taking longer showers and not, this and this, these little things that actually do affect not the world, but us here in this state. We've only got 3 million people here in this state, and we are so attached to the natural resources here. Utah has got, I think, the second largest amount of federal lands that are preserved. We've got national forests, we got national monuments, we got all sorts of things that we're trying to preserve here. And it's baffling to me that people who live here and who see those things and take advantage of the mountains and the canyons and the rivers don't feel a priority to help the environment. But lots of them feel connected to it. It's just like Dominik was saying, just because you know doesn't mean you put it forward. Even if you knew exactly what you could do to fight a drought, but it's like a little bit too much work and you're too busy, then people will just prioritize whatever is right in front of them.
I really want to talk about what everyone has said. I'm going to try and answer my own question. I am going to go with the, have you made any changes to your lifestyle, energy consumption due to your views on climate change and what happened? I grew up in a place where we didn't even have sprinkler systems because it rained. So it was always green and I didn't have to think about water. And then when I moved to Utah, water rights and water, and I lived in Idaho for a little bit as well, and in a farming community. So the water was this huge issue that I had never thought about before. And my husband's family is from the San Francisco area in California. And my mother-in-law literally has buckets of water around the house. So every time she's trying to like heat up water, she'll collect that water and she'll use it to flush her toilet so that she's not wasting any of the water. Like I went from not having to care about it at all to seeing like really extreme measures. And then, you know, also struggling. Like I would love to buy all organic things. I prefer more plant-based. So I definitely minimize the amount of meat that we have in our house, and that's my preference. But a lot of times I've been in situations where it's come down to what can I afford? And I think that if you're talking about this, the planet Earth is this unifying force, and everywhere there are places that are much worse off than I've been when I've had to make those decisions on what I can do. And so thinking about developing countries and other places where putting solar panels in or all of these tracking down places where you can recycle something is really difficult. There's one place in the city that collects glass to recycle. I went there, I had bags that I was just saving. I was like, okay, I'm going to take it to the specific place. And I went 4 different times and it was never open. like the bin was supposed to be there, but it wasn't. And so I kept I kept it in my car, and I just have all this glass in the back of my van as I'm driving around and couldn't ever find it. So I think that one of the issues we face with social issues is handing it off to someone else. Like someone else is thinking about that and they should make the decisions and they should fix it for everyone. Or like it's true. What I do as an individual is nothing compared to the industries that like the amount of pollution they put out is astronaut. Like even if everyone in my city or my state took really stringent measures, it still wouldn't match what's happening with like the steel mill that's in our city, you know? So I feel like Stewart mentioned, like someone just tell me what to do. But also the rhetoric that I've heard and from media is that's so much on like, you should be doing this in your home and you should be doing that. And the focus is so much on the individual, and we're not holding these industries accountable that I'm like, I can shift things and I'm willing to shift things, like move away from paper products, have like more reusable things. But it's like this amount of guilt that I feel when we're not holding industries accountable. And even on the global scale, that like the US can buy like, well, maybe you reduce your pollution and we'll buy the carbon emissions from you so we can still keep doing things the way we've been doing them. Like there's so many layers to it that it's hard to know where to start. So all right, we can now just kind of explore. I feel like everyone said really meaty stuff to revisit and talk about, but we'll open the floor for that.
In the background, I checked the cultural comparison, how our countries compare on a long-term orientation and how we are different. I think I sent you a link in the chat. I'm not sure if it's allowed or not, but you can open it and check it. I was seeking with my comment to get some hope, and almost all of you gave me more reasons to be less hopeful than before. So that's interesting. So maybe I ask additional question in context of this. Do you believe that technology will save us in this manner, like I can see your faces, Mona and Isma, like desalinization of salt water that helps with droughts, or will come up with a magic component that will suck up the CO2 from the atmosphere and put it into bricks or something like this. Do you get any hope in there? Because that's the latest resort of hope, technology and scientists. So. Isma?
I hate to do that, but I do not have technology as my last resort. I think, though, it plays a major role for humanity in the upcoming years and decades, I do nevertheless not believe that we can throw a whole lot of new technology, many of which is not even invented yet, on the challenges that we face and just continue consuming and just continue growing. For me, the underlying factor of such, which is more our economic system that is inevitably connected to constant growth, is something that we have to question, or that we may as well at least attempt to question. So I do believe that innovation and technology do play a big role and that we need to invest there. But I also do believe that we as individuals, and you stated that many times, yes, individuals are important, but even more the corporations and also the reasons or the rules on which such corporations run need to be rethought, and we need to change the incentives in our human social economic systems. That's my personal viewpoint on that.
I can try to add a little bit of hope. I think that, well, maybe it was a glimpse of hope. I think with COVID, especially what we saw, like Stewart mentioned, our natural resources here and the landscapes are remarkable. Like we have red rock that feels like you're on the planet Mars. We have lush forests. We have these majestic mountains. We have 5 national parks in Utah, and they're incredible. And what we saw during COVID, when people didn't have to be so busy and everywhere, they were flocking to the national parks. Like you were getting turned away because there were so many people at the national parks. And I think that the more that we connect with nature and appreciate it, we're more willing to work for it. I think that's one of the ways forward. Again, it's this getting proximate to the issue, right? Like the more we just leave it to someone else, like maybe technology will fix it. Maybe the UN will fix it. Maybe someone else will fix it. I think it takes that personal interaction. And I think also traveling and understanding, I was in Zambia with my son last June. And as soon as you stepped out, we went to Lusaka is where we landed in the capital. And the smell of exhaust was just overwhelming. Like it was hard to breathe. It was terrible. And I think understanding what it looks like in other places is another way forward. But yeah, anytime we rely on someone else to fix things, I feel like that's a problem. But then there's that conflict between, okay, if I fix things, still I feel like it's holding industries accountable. But that comes with like a very clear like understanding of, you won't get all the cheap stuff from China then. Like if we're trying to like bringing everything over and all of these exports, like we're gonna have to figure something out. So we can't just like villainize industry and expect to have the same lifestyle. We have to just have a better understanding of things and be willing to look at them. And you shared a resource. I read this book called The Sixth Extinction a while ago, and it was amazing and terrifying at the same time, but it was enough to kind of put a fire under me and be like, okay, like there are serious things on the horizon. And I have 5 kids, like I have kids as well. I don't want them to be stuck with all of these problems. So what can I do about it?
One comment to this, or everything we're talking about rely on delayed gratification, that we need to wait to see results, and that goes against our psychology. It's even hard to eat healthy, knowing that after 3 months you will get in better shape or your body will be better. What about taking care of your environment, to allow your kids to have a better planet. That's the really delayed gratification.
Okay, I don't know if this will make it worse, Dominik. I hope not. I think it depends, for me at least, what you want out of life. And if we live our life in the sense of I want to make the most of life for me personally, or even for the next generation, then it's all a very streamlined version of for me at least. I'm not judging, everybody is free to do it, but I find that if I look at the world, it's really what is my purpose of being, and to have, for me, it is a spiritual question to find out, also because you were mentioning in the beginning that your best friend would describe you that you have changed. I think this is what it's about, to have these realizations, how we interact and treat one another. My favorite example is usually, I don't know how it is in the US, but in Germany we have, or we used to have in corporations, you do an internship, which are of course unpaid. And if you're the head of that company, you find it completely normal, because this is, it saves money, and then you get another resource, and this is ideal. Now you are the parent of said kid. That kid comes home and says, like, I have to work 40 hours a week and I don't get paid. And then all of a sudden you're the mother or the father, and you're saying, oh, this is incredible, this is exploitation. And you put on that hat and you get annoyed with that. And I find with climate change, it's the same thing. Because it needs to be thought through, or you have to be aware how everything is interconnected. That when it comes to technical devices, for instance, where a lot of people may say, oh yeah, I'm very pro environment and I take care, and then they spend a lot of time with their computers, having several computers, or the mobile services which run on servers, which take a lot more energy. So it's, but I don't buy any plastics anymore, so they just reduce what they see but not the implications. Or ordering online, which is maybe faster, but it increases a lot more waste due to packaging. But then you have to look again, what about fair wages? And then do you want, if you have to do your shopping yourself, then it costs more, because you cannot, if you don't import things from China or wherever it is produced. And I think becoming aware of the interconnectedness of everything, it takes time. And I would never suggest, as you were describing your village, that people have to change with things that are too far removed from what are their priorities. But I find for myself, having a conversation like this one, to observe and perceive, okay, I totally understand that in Utah that you would like to have 9 months of snow. I'm very happy that I live in a place where we don't rely on 9 months of snow for having a safe amount of water. But this opens my horizon. Then yes, of course, when I lived in India, I know that I have to take care of water in a different way here. But if I apply the same rule to Germany, I get a different problem, because the structures of our pipelines are from the 70s. If there's not enough water flushing through, the water will spoil. So I cannot just apply one solution to the next solution, but have to take it into consideration where I am, and then live with that. And I think in this sense, there is a connection to be made and to be found. I'm optimistic. I know I cannot make you optimistic, but we'll just simply have more conversations, and maybe this simple optimism. And I call myself a pragmatic idealist. I think, we take small steps and then we still achieve my ideals. Of course, you all have to follow mine. That is the way to go.
Yeah, one thing that I think about often when it comes to the environmentally minded arguments that I always hear is, I consider myself a pretty environmentally minded person. But when people come at me with the argument that it's purely a moral argument, it resounds with me because it means something to me. I'm like, oh yeah, the earth is something that we should take care of. I already have this natural stewardship. I have this intrinsic love for nature. Of course we should take care of it. But if you're coming at it to somebody who doesn't already have that built in, from a moral standpoint of like, this is our duty, this is our job, this is our shared earth, this is the globe we all have in common, but that doesn't mean anything to lots of people. So why would they change? It's like, it'd be like me trying to use my religion on Dominik, but he doesn't believe in my religion, and he'd be like, why does that? I'd be like, well, okay, well, the prophet's gonna say this, and he's like, I don't care. And so I see that a lot with lots of environmentally minded arguments. And I think it has to be brought down, it has to be practicalized. I'm a big organizer. I love organizing things. My apps on my phone are all like color coded. My DVDs are all in alphabetical order. My mom loves it when I come to visit her house because I'll always clean out her pantry and I'll organize it because it's just chaos in there. But the thing I've learned quickly is like an organization that I love will just get ruined in a day by my little sisters because they're not going to put everything back in the shelf exactly how it was. If you don't even know that it's alphabetized, you just put DVDs wherever they go. And so it's kind of incumbent on those of us who care about the environment to create systems that are as easy and as common for people to use that are helpful for the environment. Right now, the easiest and most common systems are unfortunately the ones that seem to be the worst for the environment. And so we have to like that is my optimism. And if we're talking about optimistic viewpoints of the future, I think we have enough people every day who are kind of being awakened to the importance of the issue, that if we get all these minds together, we can create systems that are easier than, you know, one glass recycling place that's open for like 2 hours a day in an entire city. And if you don't make it, you don't make it. Like if there was a easier system, people would just do it because that would just become normal.
There is a recent book by Paul Bloom, The Sweet Spot. I think the subtitle is The Pleasures of Suffering and the Search for Meaning. A really great book. I highly recommend it. And he discusses this there, when we find a meaning in pain, because some of the solutions we are striving for is painful for us short term. We need to limit our possessions, we limit traveling and so on. So there is some sacrifice. And he says in this book that when people make sense of the suffering, they are more willing to do this. They are willing to suffer if they know what's the outcome of the suffering, and they have to believe that there is no other way that cannot be achieved without suffering. Then they are willing to do this. You're making faces, Muna, so I'm not sure
I
what the
don't believe in suffering, gaining anything through suffering. That is not my mantra. And I think I find it, what I would like to mention is like, I've come to term it sort of the pervasion of morality. That's what I feel we've lived. Or when I was at university, we talked about the postmodernism era. Everybody was like, yeah, everything is relative depending on which point of view I take. And over the past, well, 5 to 10 years, maybe it has become very narrow-minded. So it's one version. So it's, if I understood Stewart correctly, it's the morality argument of anything actually. And if you don't see things according to my point of view, then you're per se wrong, and it becomes with a moral impetus. And I think that is something which makes conversations incredibly challenging, because you don't leave room for someone to take into account that they come from a different history and story. And I have to admit, especially when it comes to travel, that I don't believe that we should not leave our homes anymore in order to save the environment, because I think travel widens the horizons and connects us, and then you understand by seeing something else that it has an impetus, that your behavior creates an effect to someone else. But I will have to have a serious conversation, a living room conversation with the person you just mentioned who wrote that book, The Sweet Spot. We'll do that.
interesting read. I highly recommend it. So.
I'm muted. We had plans to stop 5 minutes ago, so I'm doing a time check with everyone. And typically at this point, we would move to a reflection round. So just kind of a highlight of, what are you taking away from this conversation? Is there something you're going to continue to think about? Has it moved you to some sort of action? Has it changed your perspective at all in the conversation? And then we kind of wrap up. I want to value all of your time, and so try and be timely about this. And again, when you're ready to do your takeaway, you can just kind of give an indicator, and we'll wrap things up.
I'm happy to continue talking. No, my takeaway is that I think these conversations for me need to happen more often. And it was especially I think the cross-cultural dynamic is an eye-opener for me. And I think we touched upon so many different little topics that I would have loved to dive into more. So the takeaways that I'm still very curious for, which I'm very grateful. And I enjoyed having these different glimpses into your brains, so to speak, very much.
I may continue then. And yes, I do agree. I think this past 60, 70 minutes, I'm not quite sure how long we actually took, has confirmed that those open and authentic conversations are indeed something that can and maybe should happen more often. And I believe we have tackled multiple topics at a time, which was very interesting to get to know each other, and which was good to have like a very high level discussion. And I would also love to choose either of those questions or really either of those topics and go into more detail and then understand those different perspectives. And yes, we are a fairly diverse group, but it would also be very interesting, maybe that's something we can discuss later, how we can make that really even more maybe cross-cultural. So how can we get people from different ethnicities in here? How can we also maybe even more talk about generations? Something I struggle with sometimes is how do we also involve future generations, and how do we at times also include non-human viewpoints, for example, the planetary perspective into such. So I think it was very interesting to have this conversation. And indeed, what Muna said in the beginning, I think, yes, we are somewhat alike, but we are also still very different. And I think that made this conversation very enjoyable and insightful for myself. And I would love to continue doing such living room conversations with the group of this, but also with other groups. So thank you very much from my end.
I can continue. I have two takeouts, like immediate takeouts. First of all, I want to ask these questions to my 15-year-old son. I'm really curious what will be his answers to these questions. And the other one is that even though my friends would describe me as the good listener, I had to bite my tongue many times during this conversation, not to jump into the conversation, not to ask additional questions. So I'm leaving this conversation reminding myself how important and how sometimes challenging is to just sit and listen, allow someone to talk through the thinking process. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I feel the same way, I think, as Dominik does. That's in my family, we are rapid fire talkers. We often talk over each other all day. And so it is very hard to have a lot of thoughts and a lot of opinions and restrain them, put them into little sound bites when it is your turn, and be willing to listen. But I always love doing that. I just downloaded that book, actually, the Sweet Spot, because it sounds very interesting. So that'll be exciting for me to explore. In general, I just love getting broader perspectives. My life is very North and South American centric. I've got lots of influences from both of those two continents, but there's an entire hemisphere that I don't get a lot of influence from. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to hear from you guys and to be part of this group. So thank you for that.
I think one of the things that I'm leaving with was, Dominik's initial plea to change his mind and offer a little hope. And so I think I'm gonna think about that. Like, where do I feel hopeful? Because I don't feel like all is lost. So maybe figuring out how to better articulate that. And then, like you mentioned, having this conversation with my kids. We did a whole year of adventure where every month we would go outside somewhere, and sometimes we'd travel to another state or just stay local, but we had this like really rich experience of appreciating where we live in natural beauty. But I don't think that I necessarily connected those dots really clearly to then here's our stewardship, and here's why we try to have less stuff. I'm also trying to move away from more stuff in my house and doing more experiences. So, but I hadn't connected all of those dots for them. So I think that's something I'm going to try to do while I contemplate how to be more hopeful, and spread that optimism where I live. So thank you again for joining this conversation. We do have, just because I know you mentioned in your intro that you do conversations frequently, we have over 150 topics that are free to use. So feel free to grab any of the topics from our website and use them however you would like. Even like you mentioned, just grabbing a question from them can be a really nice way to get conversation started. And then I am always interested in future conversations. So if that's something that happens with this group, or I can support you in doing it in other ways, I would be enthusiastic and happy to do that. So thank you for setting aside time to be in this group and have this conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you for organizing and taking care, Becca, and everybody for participating as well from my side.
Yeah. And this was, I will say, like, created this guide specifically for this conversation. So it did grab from 3 different conversation guides. So it's like, it was a lot. Like, we have one just on social identity, one just on media and polarization, and one just on climate. So yeah, it was kind of a broad spectrum. So I also resonate with everyone that said, I wish we could have gone deeper on one of them, but I loved getting that social identity piece and hearing from all of you before we went to the other one too. So thanks again.
Absolutely. And I believe it was a deliberate choice to do exactly that, right? To mix the different conversation guides and to delve into different topics. And I think that was also, yeah, a good benefit for this very conversation.
All right, everyone, enjoy your weekends.
Yes. Enjoy your Friday. Be active. We are going
I know,
to
it's like, it's morning still. I'm still wearing my pajamas, so.
If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or two, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating, and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this, and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ismaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.